Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and I'm very excited for today's episode because Navy SEALs make up about 1% of the entire military population, and only about 20 to 25% of them actually make it through the training. A lot of similarity there to the Navy nuclear program, which also has a very small percentage of the people in the military actually doing it, and then a very small percentage of people who actually make it through the program. And for those of you who don't know much about the Navy SEALs, it's a very difficult program. Most of y'all should be familiar with plenty of the training. I mean, basically drowning you on purpose, rolling around in the sand. Everyone's probably familiar with what they call Hell Week. And people know that there's a lot of injuries that happen. And we've seen a lot of good Navy SEALs kind of get the short end of the stick with medical stuff. And I've actually met some amazing Navy SEALs who weren't given a second chance and they had to become a boatswain's mate. But we're going to talk with our member today about some of the truth of that, because there's a lot of Navy SEALs who say they were injured, but really they just failed the program. And we're going to get a little inside scoop on how accurate that statement is. But I say all of that to emphasize one of today's points, which is our guest lost that opportunity, an opportunity that almost very, very few people are allowed to have. He was privileged to make it through and then ended up giving it up. He didn't quit, he didn't throw it away necessarily, but we're going to get into that. And I say all of that for everyone out there to just take a step back and look at where you are. How many people can actually be where you are and do what you do? And just give it a second thought before you do anything reckless or uneducated or, get caught up in your emotions. And we're going to talk about all that stuff today, both young adults and full grown men and women. That being said, we are here with Thomas J. LaGrave, former Navy SEAL, an author, and he is out here helping mentor young adults. Mr. LaGrave, it's so great to have you on the show. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, my story arcs back to the late 1970s. I entered the military under the Carter administration and immediately thereafter became part of the Reagan administration. It was a military that had just ended the Vietnam War and it had a really bad low morale.
Yeah.
So that's what I stepped into, and I had no forward prior knowledge of what a Navy SEAL was. It just wasn't in my vocabulary. I was the no, not many, or actually just one relative served in the military, and I was pretty much like the first one. So at that point, right now, I took a screening test and passed it and ended up, I went to boot camp in San Diego. I went to Balboa Park to become a hospital corpsman. And from there, I went across the bridge to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. My BUDS class is 106. And we graduated, it was February the 29th, 1980. So at this point, I gonna jump to the end of the career where I got discharged for drug use, and it was horrible. It was a really dark time and dark places, and I was literally sent on my way. 4 months later, family kind of picked me back up and said, "Enough's enough." And at that point, I had had enough. Ended up going to a recovery on a 90-day program. And then for the next 32 years, I was clean and sober. At that time, I started working with young people at an adolescent recovery facility. The ages were 13 to 17. Then I did a Boys and Girls Club, which is 6 to 18. Afterwards, I had no credentials and I saw I had a talent. So I went back to school, got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a license, and a board certification. So I'm what's called a licensed clinical social worker. So from there, it comes to the 35th year. Um, in addiction, it never goes away, it never ends. And I forgot my humility and taking care of that side of me and ended up going out for 2 weeks. And it was the worst 2 weeks of my life because I had never experienced suicidal ideation. And I was almost there. Uh, I don't know why I ended up turning myself into a VA, and the process began again becoming clean and sober, which now is 5 years. And it's the best 5 years because it's honest. And now I've circled myself with all the experienced and the knowledge bases and the people that check in on me to make sure I'm doing okay. So
Right.
that in a nutshell is pretty much the arc of the past 40 years of my life.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank you firstly for being open and sharing about, leaving the Navy SEALs. Like I hinted at earlier, a lot of people don't make it through the program, and, there are some beliefs that some of them lie about why they got out, because if they can blame a medical injury and not their own mental state, it's easier. And also just to say you got kicked out because of drugs. I mean, that's something that I'm sure there were a lot of feelings of shame, regret, and
Yeah, absolutely.
disappointment, not just yourself but your family, your friends, the people you served with. And while I'm against drug use, the truth is the Navy has programs where if you are an alcoholic or struggling with alcoholism, they will send you to a facility in Florida, or I don't know if they have other facilities, but I know there's one in Florida where they will help you try to recover. But when it comes to drug use, there's a no tolerance policy. The issue is the military breeds an environment of extreme stress, of a lot of negative emotions, and I know a lot of people who turn to drugs to cope with that if alcohol isn't working. Specifically, weed is the hot topic of, should the military allow it recreationally? Because in some states and areas, it's legal. And a lot of military members want to argue, hey, we can drink alcohol when we're not on shift. And there's plenty of sailors who drink on drink on shift. Don't do that. Don't advise that. But if we can do it in our free time, and we won't do it at work, it should be fine. But the Navy has a no tolerance policy. But there were rumors, and I haven't gotten confirmation of this, but they were talking about making it up to the CEO's discretion of whatever command you're at, because the military is losing absolutely so many people. I mean, everyone who was on restriction in the Navy, it was like, got caught, got caught, got caught. And a lot of them were doing it because their mental health was just failing them. And the Navy's programs for mental health were failing them. And so that's what they did. I remember one guy, he might come on the show, a buddy of mine I served with. I mean, he waited a year for a single mental health appointment that was less than 30 minutes, and it was the guy saying, you control your emotions, don't worry about it. And then it was like they booked him for 6 months later for a follow-up appointment, so he started smoking. It was the only way he could go to work. Now, I don't approve, again, of drug use, but I can understand why people are being pushed towards that. And so whether the Navy and the other military branches are going to change their policy or not, it's definitely a hot topic, and we can get into that. But let's start, Mr. LaGrave, with why did you end up turning to drugs? You were a Navy SEAL. You were working on missions that you probably can't tell us about, and I'm sure those missions were stressful and definitely high stakes. So, is the military kind of the center point of why you started using drugs, or was it the personal life, or the mixture of both?
It actually started in adolescence. I was 14 when I started, and within a year, the reality is I didn't see it, but I was addicted. The behaviors were there. I was 15 years old. Let's go to Let's go to 18 years old, and I'm back home living in the house. I had gotten to go to college, and I screwed up with the grades because I was partying. And then I went home, and I got caught by my mother with my younger brother, who at the time was 14. We were getting high, and my
Mm,
father said, hit the road. So
right.
what I did was ended up, I wasn't going to go back to his house. I can do this. And at that time, the military couldn't get anybody to volunteer. And I pretty much got everything I asked for. And in that, I brought with me the addiction.
Mm,
And then it was early on, they couldn't find drugs and alcohol, or they couldn't find drugs in urinalysis because they couldn't get the test right yet.
Oh,
And
okay.
when it happened, which would have been forestall issue, aircraft carrier, pilots, flight crew, Ronald Reagan zero tolerance, 1982-ish, 81, 82. And at that point, all the senior folks in the military bailed because they weren't going to lose their retirement for a zero tolerance getting popped because everybody was smoking weed.
Right.
Everybody was drinking. That's part of the culture. And so it was that thinking that I could party and operate. And there was an arc. It diminished over the years. I'd say I got discharged in 1988. By 1986, 87, I was in no shape physically. I was barely hanging on. And at 1988, when I got discharged, this was the point where all of it converged from an addiction starting at 14 to 29, 1988. Out, out I went.
Okay, so I'm trying to do the math. How many years did you do as a Navy SEAL before you left?
I was there for 8.5 years, well, training for 6 months, 8.5 years. And
Okay.
I was discharged at 9 years and 6 months.
Wow. So, I mean, that had become a significant part of your identity by then. I mean, you were there for almost a decade. So, what? How was losing that like? I mean, you went from Navy SEAL, which is not just, first of all, anyone in the military. You get this level of authority and leadership that you don't have in the civilian world. You get this pride and honor in the uniform and serving. You get all this respect, and then the Navy SEALs are like a level above that in terms of identity and all that pride and honor and respect and power you have over other people. So I mean, you really fell from there. So how was that like dealing with that transition?
Your word was perfect, identity. I couldn't separate me from the SEAL. And then I was discharged with an RE code of 4, will not take him back. They gave me a general under honorable because they didn't want to ruin my life. A
Right.
year after I went and got a military lawyer, I've got now honorable discharges. But at that time, nobody understood. There was nowhere I could turn, nobody I could share. I had to do this, grin and bear it. And it was horrible.
Right.
That aspect is still pretty much in place. You can drink, you can't do the drugs. And so at this point, it's we moved to recovery. Recovery allowed me to live a life differently. I couldn't figure that out. I had like I was coming up on a year, and I'm a 12 stepper. I did AA,
Right.
and I was going to use again because I could not figure out my past. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it. And that was key. The military shuts us all down. We have to, if you're going to be pulling a trigger of any kind, you can't hesitate. So that's part of that shutting down. Then the alcohol use and the drug use, I'm running from all my issues. So at 1 year and some months, I ended up going to work for an adolescent recovery facility so that I could see kids living at the age I was for the same issues that I had, and I could watch them. I did not go there to help kids. It was selfish. I went there to help me.
Wow.
4 years later, 4 years later, it was I had gotten sober. I had seen them. They had given me courage. They had given me purpose. They had given me meaning. And then I followed it one more time I ran a boys and girls club. I started with 59 kids, ended up with 440. And all this time, clean and sober, the past, I don't even recognize it. I don't tell folks what I did. I was a hospital corpsman. That's what you get. And I came from a time where the Vietnam era veterans that were Navy SEALs, they were what's called the quiet professional. They did not call attention to themselves. They did not bring any unwanted attention.
Right.
And it was made clear to us, all the youngsters, that the only people that need to know what you've done and how good you are is us. The world does not need to know it. And that's where I took that mentality and said, you know what? I'm just Tom. I'm a recovering addict alcoholic. I work with kids. My job's the licensed clinical social worker. And at this point, I am bringing up a book that I wrote because of my concerns with adolescent America right now. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, for sure. We know that drug use and alcoholism is drastically on the rise. Suicide in young adults and children from ages 10 to 25 are extremely high. In most places, the second leading cause of death in that age range. So it's not good. Now, Tom, do you believe that by educating the youth on the consequences of their actions, by showing yourself as a personal example, is that kind of your goal to warn them, or is your goal to educate them to make smart decisions? How exactly are you working and mentoring the youth?
It started out where I came to understand with youth, the key is playing. And if you can play like a kid, they'll let you into their world. If you play like an adult and play with a kid, they're going to leave you. They don't want to play. You're
Right.
missing the point of how to play. And that first 10 years of my sobriety, I was a little kid making up for the horrible things I had done to myself. And I got to learn from all these kids who taught me how to play. And it's that aspect that I not so much have something to tell you, but with them embracing me, they told me their darker issues. And I
Mm.
was able to give them suggestions. So it's not so much as I'm going to tell you what you need to do. That does not work. What works is being who you are and letting them see something in you that draws them to you. And then the process begins.
Yeah, I know Yayoi Komiyama. She's a great friend of mine. I've been on her show and vice versa. And she said something once, which was that kids want to be heard, but they're often seen, not heard. And so you're talking about, playing with the kids at their level, kind of saying, tell less, listen more. And I think that's the truth because a lot of youth want to be heard, especially in a day and age of a lot of divorces, of broken marriages, and family homes, and a lack of mentorship. A lot of the youth feel like they don't have someone listening to them, which goes into the formation of online identities, where people are finding communities where they feel heard one way or another, but sometimes they have to become someone else. And then, yeah, so definitely listen more, tell less. And so you mentioned your book, and I'd love for you to show it to everyone and tell us a little bit about that. I love the title because I think it's the truth of the world. It's called Special Welfare Social Warfare. And I think that, the social life, I mean, really is warfare. Now more than ever with, comment sections, with cyberbullying, with social anxiety on the rise, with people not being able to communicate as well. So tell us a little bit about what your book offers the readers.
You know what? This is the catch, but this right here is what it's all about. Adolescent to Adulthood, a guidebook. I have a 501c3 nonprofit called Honor Bound Academy. I started putting it together 20 years ago when I saw a need. And what it's based in is the military is a rite of passage for all of us. On top of it, I got a secondary education from Buds as it was another type of rite of passage. It was where I was guided, like you had said earlier, abused to the umpteenth degree, because you have to know that within you there's a place that you can go and you can hold your pain and hold your anxieties and hold your fears. This place within us is what was tapped into. And the rite of passage, the key component to it with this book is the mentorship. If there's an answer for kids, it's create a mentorship program.
Amen. Yes.
So I've created a rite of passage bringing in a very specific type of individual special forces because of the my interaction with all the various branches, with all the special forces. I have made the connections where I can reach out and ask to bring on the various types of special forces. The book itself is put together in a way that the rite of passage program has four key components. One is one of the wealthiest men in America as as the individual that is looked to from the perspective of having truly made their mark in our world. The next one down was I can't do religion as a licensed clinical social worker. It's not allowed. It's unethical. It's not
Right.
tolerated. So I wanted to make sure because my belief, the 12 steps, a power greater than myself, I am absolutely a believer. And with it, in creating this next part was looking at a spiritual domain by introducing Native American tribes, patrons that would live their way of life and integrate it into the rite of passage program. And then along with it, the identity of special forces, because that is what I am and I have access to. And the last part was we can talk at another time how I found my power greater. Leave it to the fact that I found it in a book called The Silmarillion, J.R.R. Tolkien's
Mm.
masterpiece. And I was able to use that to gain an understanding of a power greater. So what I'm looking at is in that book, there were all these different locations that were the homes of various, whether they're elves or dwarves or humans. And I use that to create the citadel that you will go to as the program, the rite of passage, is mentored by the special forces as a patron, one of the wealthiest men in America. Combine all of that. And my belief is that I can put one in every state with the understanding that each one's going to be different, but they're going to be alike. And it's in that bonding that in that program is a key element because today's youth and their connectivity is not like ours was face to face.
Right.
And so I want to give alongside, not saying one's better than the other, but allowing for a 1 year program is what Honor Bound Academy is. So those are the four components, the key ages that I have chosen: 18, 19, and 20. And
Right.
with that said, that's how addiction, finding meaning and purpose, adolescence, all of it came together for me. And I'm sitting here right now with special welfare, social warfare, adolescence to adulthood, a guidebook.
Yeah. No, those key ages you hit are very prominent in the military. It's the majority of them. Although, of course, those are important years for anyone, wherever they are.
Yeah.
Often the beginning of college, a beginning of a job, or a gap year where people are figuring themselves out. And you talked about rite of passage, and we actually mentioned that for the kind of the first time really on my show not too long ago. It's the episode Men Supporting Men with Jason Lang, and we talked about how there's a lack of father figures in the world for many of us, and we're going to social media and seeing so many different types of men, so many different skills. You've got men who are too feminine, you have men who are too masculine. There's a lot of different ideas. The word masculinity is being twisted, and we talked about how in a lot of the more tribal cultures, the more ancient cultures, you had a rite of passage to become a man, and that involved having a father figure, a mentor who was another man lead you. And you talked about how we connect, and I think it's so important that we have, that we leverage social media, podcasting, TV, radio to reach as many people as we can and create these mentorship programs. But I think it's also important to have them in person, and I think it's amazing what you're doing. What I want to do is a little side pivot to a more niche topic, which is what advice would you have for military morale, it's higher after the Vietnam era, right now, but it's still also kind of in a time period where there's a lot of mixed feelings about the military and what's going on in the world. But that being said, there are plenty of young men and even some young women who want to become Navy SEALs. So, what advice would you have for them? A bit of a reality check, but also some encouragement.
If the saying is, why reinvent the wheel? That answer for me, the manner in which you observe the military, how it is, what it does to all of us. My favorite individual was Joseph Campbell, and he wrote about the power of myth and the transition from adolescent to adulthood is ancient. And the key piece with in that reading, I saw where he said, you know, if it is your generation's turn at the war, how can you justify if you are a peaceful learning person that does not want to kill? And the part that Joseph Campbell shared so that we could come to terms with it is you need to participate in what your generation has for it, for better and for worse.
Hmm.
And you embrace it to say that I did my best to be who I was, who I am, and live your life in that military for however long you are set or have chosen to live
Right.
it, and understand that you just seek to be a good human being. And if it calls for you to take a life, war is ancient. There's a long history, a long past. And
Right.
we are not being asked to do anything that countless generations have. Is that the absolute answer? Is that the complete answer? No. But for the majority of people that find themselves in the military, you know what it does to us. You're living a life that can't be explained. You are on constantly. And then when it's
Yeah.
time to relax, we tend to relax with substance.
Hmm.
So, in that, how to change that part of the military, I'm not sure. All that I can say is how to change yourself, seeing yourself as living the life that was put before me and doing it with honor. How's that?
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a lot of bystanderism and complaining in the world nowadays, and I like what you said. We can't always change our situations, but we can change how we perceive those situations. And I understand what you're saying, and I'm sure there's going to be people who are upset saying, "Well, we wish that we didn't have to be, children of war. That we have to deal with this stuff." And you're right. The military life can't be explained. It's unnatural. It is very different. And I think there are ways to make it a lot better, and I think we're kind of seeing some of that. But I had an episode, and I'll add it to the description below, with David Nathanson. He was in the military for like 34 or more years, so that's most of his life. So we talked, and he said something that I really liked, which was, the military is a huge organization with a lot of red tape, a lot of different papers, and if we change constantly, we'll never be ready. And the point of the military is to be always ready. I mean, that's the Navy saying, always ready. At the same time, the bigger the organization, the longer it takes to see those changes ripple all throughout. And, before we started recording here, Tom, you talked about the M flag. You mentioned that to me. I don't think they had it in 1970s, right? But it is something that they have now. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. It seemed like you had a positive opinion about it. And, I'll express my opinion about it and what I think about it, but I'd love to hear yours first.
That was the circle came around. So I started the program was Military Family Life Consultants. It started in 2004. I became an MFLAC in 2009. And then for the next 7 years, I traveled all around the world, wherever military bases were, other than we weren't allowed into war zones.
Right, right,
So I worked with Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force. And 2 years into the program, the last vestige of who was willing to participate in the MFLAC program was SOCOM, Special Operations Command. They didn't want it because of the stigma and all of that. Well,
right,
it got such good results in big Navy and Army, Air Force, Marines that they said, okay. So the director of the program knew my background. So I was tasked right at the beginning and sent in and got to work with all the branches and all the special forces. And the military what we are is short-term problem-solving support of individuals, their families, and commands. I am not doing per se therapy because the military has got their therapists. But what I'm doing is, yeah, I know. But what I'm trying to do is find out where the issue is, see if I can't address it, and if not, to where I can send it.
right.
And there were those times where I had to send it back into the command because um, you were going to hurt yourself or somebody else. And in the military, you can take yourself out, just don't take out your left and right.
Right. Well,
So
what I'll say is the M flag is nice because there's a safer level of comfort with it because it's a civilian, right? Which is one of my goals in life is to create a more significant civilian-based program, third party for military members for mentorship and for career advising, financial advising. Because, like you said, the military has their therapists. They have your financial counselor, they have your career counselor, right? And what that means typically is there's someone in uniform who already has a rate in a job, who has five other positions on top of it, that then gets assigned based off who knows what to be a financial counselor or a career counselor. And they just really don't have the time to dedicate to you and all your issues. Whereas that at least on my ship, I know because of all the suicides and the issues, they had stationed an MFLAC honor ship during the shipyards, and you could go in and talk to him. I think there was two or three of them actually. I know there was a man. I think there was a woman as well. And like you said, it's less therapy, more just conversation, having someone there for you, being able to express these frustrations that you might be worried about talking to your chief or your sergeant or whoever it is about. Because, like we've talked about before on the show, when it comes to issues in the military, there's a lot of see something, say something, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, safety is important, but you've got to be careful with who you tell what because everyone there, I mean, yeah, everyone's a brotherhood, a sisterhood, right? But you also have your military obligation to do as well. And I'm not saying don't trust the people around you, but be cautious with what you say. And more specifically in the military than the civilian world, because the consequences are far more significant. And what I mean by that, as if you haven't heard before on my show, if you have a depressive episode or a suicidal episode at work in the civilian world, there will be consequences, right? And maybe you'll lose your job, worst case scenario, typically not. But in the military, I mean, losing your job in the military, you lose so much more. The financial security, your location, your identity, as we mentioned earlier. So it's really important. Or even worse than losing everything is being changed to a different job in the military. And that can be way worse, as crazy as it seems. With the civilian world, you get some kind of control over your destiny. If you're re-rated, if you lose your security clearance, top secret, whatever it may
that's the
be,
one. That's
yeah,
the
if
one.
you lose that and then you end up being a barnacle scrubber, for lack of better terms, that could be worse than civilian life for sure. So, I mean, Tom, what kind of strategies did you implement as an MFLAC person to really communicate with military members? Because I know we said it's a lot more comfortable to talk to you, especially if you're a veteran, you understand. but there's still a lot of boundaries up, right? We talked about military, especially military men being more stoic, more cold, less expressive of their emotions, and a lot less trusting. So, how did you really get these people to communicate with you, and vice versa?
The key piece to it that I did not say prior was that I'm strictly confidential. That was when I first stepped on a command, I had to go to the commanding officer and tell him that I'm strictly confidential. And does he have or she have an issue with that? And that was the first conversation. So that key piece that I am going to keep your secrets, except you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt someone else, child abuse, domestic violence, or sexual abuse. I'm a reporter. That I am going to report. Anything else stays with me. And I found what worked the best is the military is forever getting new systems. And when you get a new system, it comes with a book and a bunch of individuals coming to train you.
Yeah.
I assessed whatever your issues were. I went and found the type of information that could serve you, and I presented it to you in the form of homework. Now, that wasn't big, but once they got seeing that there are things that they can do, there are mindfulness things, there are different types of therapies. The one that I use is cognitive behavioral. Well, you can explain that to the vast majority of people in the military, and they're going to get that and understand that.
Right.
And in that, I give them the necessary, ABC of what is it, how does it work, what do you do, how do you say, and you keep them in the boundaries and you let them find their own way because I have never found somebody's answer in here. I'm looking at you trying to find out in you where that answer is, and I
Yeah.
am proceeding after that. Once we have it, then the material that I think best serves you is put before you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a military member or you know someone who's a military member who is struggling with those topics that an MFLAC can't cover, I'm not exactly sure, but I would check with your chaplain. I think they have
Yes,
confidentiality over
yes, they do.
everything, right?
Yes,
Yeah, so I would definitely check in with them if you have
good
those
on you.
more serious, heavier, darker topics on your heart and you need to talk to someone about them. They're re- kind of religiously affiliated. Military religion's different, but that would be another great source to talk to. And you could always find a priest who is civilian side as well if you don't trust or don't like the military chaplains for whatever reason. But I've talked to plenty of them. Most of them are great people and they're willing to help you out. And same with the MFLAX. I've never sat down with one necessarily, but I've met them on my ship, and they're people who want to help, right? I mean, it's not about getting paid. Most of them, like you mentioned, are already veterans, right? So they don't really necessarily need the money. They want to give back to the community that they served in and help out the people who went through what they're going through. And so, Tom, this has been a great conversation. What we want to know is what is the future looking like for you? You're battling every day with recovery to maintain that, and all while helping others do the same as well as mentoring. So, where do you see all of this mentorship and these programs going? Whether that's more books or more programs, what is your future plan looking like?
The way I'm looking at it right now is I spent the last 10 years attempting to get funding. The program, I went back to academia with it because I needed it to be, it's based off of a special forces rite of passage, and then it's made to the civilian world. And there's nothing out there that has all those pieces that I can say, if you do this, it works. So I had to go and look at the gold standards in various areas and have it researched where I have a little of that and a little of that and a little of that. And in academia, they found all that information so that I could footnote it. So, with that said, the process is that I wanted one individual for the first 2 years because I needed to see where all the mistakes, where it's all written in the book. The 501c3 is A to Z in the book, but I needed to know where and how the problems were going to be. So the bottom line, I was looking for $6,191,000 to open my first honor bound academy where I would serve 50 youth in the first year, roll those 50 over into the second year, and bring on 50 new ones where the older ones are teaching the newer ones and the mentors
Right.
are learning how to bond them. So if I would have gotten $6,191,000, probably won't have a book right now. But because I didn't, I wrote it so that I left it in perpetuity, so that in the future, if somebody comes across it, sees that this is something that can work and has the wherewithal for finances, you can have it. It's right in there. It's my gift back to the generation who taught me what I needed to be in order to be what you needed me to be for you. How's that for a wraparound?
No, I think that's a great answer, and I appreciate. I mean, part of what you're doing too now is getting on podcasts to not only just
Yes.
promote your book as a resource for people, but to share your story. And like I said earlier, I really appreciate you sharing it because I don't think people understand the shame. The world has changed a lot, where there's a lot more empathy, sympathy, vulnerability, but there's still a lot of people who would hear you were a Navy SEAL who got kicked out for drugs, and I mean, they would just have a very nasty opinion about it. So I really appreciate the courage it takes to go out there and share that story and hopefully inspire others to share their stories. I love in a previous episode with Ms. Whiskey Lynn, she said, recover loudly so others don't die quietly. And I think that's great. And for actually, since we're at it, for people who have left the Navy SEALs, whether their contract just came up, whether it was for an injury, whether it was for behavior, whatever it may be, and they're struggling with that piece of identity, with wanting to be a Navy SEAL again or always being a Navy SEAL, not wanting to start a new life, and whether that's coming out in the form of depression and suicide or just confusion or poor decisions, what advice would you give them?
I wouldn't because they'd smack me. You know what? I am what I am. My story is I got discharged from SEAL Team 1 for drug use. Oh, what was it? June 28th, 1988. It's still there. It's who I am. I am both those people. I have integrated them. This is there for you too, so that there's a way, there's an answer, there's support. There are people out there. And I just had one of my class reunions. I went back. Now, I'm teammates with all SEALs, but I have a group that I went through training with buds.
Right. Yeah.
That is my class. And that's a whole different animal in there. And all of them have embraced me. I'm seen as I've always been seen to them. And that's all I need. The the teams, I don't know how you're looking at me. I don't, I hope it's well. I'm here if you need me and my help. I am willing, but my classmate, they're the ones that will treat you just like you were the day you rang that bell, not out, but on. You rang it to go on to the teams. That moment there, your classmates will always see you that way. So that's what I would offer. Go back to your classmates.
So embracing your new identity, understanding that you're now a former Navy SEAL, you've got a new life ahead of you, and then leaning on those who are tied to that old identity and that support you through your transition, leaning on them for support. I think that's beautiful. I think that's great advice. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to check out the book, we'll have the link in the description below for that, as well as Mr. LaGrave's LinkedIn, where you could reach out to him for speaking engagements, podcast guesting, or mentorship programs, whatever it may be, or if you just want to connect with him. But Mr. LaGrave, Tom, it's been a great time with you. I think we've had a great, meaningful conversation, and I hope it helped a lot of people. And I appreciate you coming on the show today.
And I appreciate you, Mr. Whiskey. Thank you so much for everything.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide. through the waves we ride. Jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side. As one family we will abide. In the heart of a ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.